The people who seem mentally unshakable in 2025 aren't just lucky, they know something you don't. While everyone else is drowning in decision fatigue and emotional reactivity, they've figured out how to build what researchers call anti-fragile mental strength. This means getting stronger from stress rather than just surviving it, like building immunity through controlled exposure to challenges. You've seen them, the person who stays calm during chaos, who makes tough decisions without spiraling, who faces criticism without crumbling. You probably think they were born different, but here's the reality check. They're using specific neuroplasticity-based training methods that rewire their brains for resilience. But before we get to the solution, you need to understand just how bad things have gotten. The 2025 mental collapse crisis. The data reveals our collective mental state has reached crisis levels. Decision fatigue rates have skyrocketed compared to past decades, now requiring significantly more time and mental energy for simple daily choices. The average person struggles with basic decisions like what to eat for lunch or which route to take to work. This isn't laziness or overthinking, this is systematic mental degradation happening in real time. Emotional reactivity patterns paint an even grimmer picture. Current measurements show that people respond to minor stressors with the same physiological intensity that previous generations reserved for genuine emergencies. A delayed text message now triggers the same stress response that a physical threat would have caused 20 years ago. The human nervous system has essentially lost its ability to calibrate appropriate responses to different levels of challenge. Research from Gloria Mark reveals that our attention spans have plummeted from 2.5 minutes to just 47 seconds, with constant digital interruptions rewiring our brains for heightened stress responses. Recovery time from emotional triggers has increased dramatically since 2015. What used to take someone 5 minutes to bounce back from now takes over an hour. This means people are spending exponentially more time in compromised mental states throughout each day. The cumulative effect transforms daily life into a constant struggle against internal chaos rather than productive engagement with external challenges. The comparison to previous decades makes the severity unmistakable. In 1995, the average person reported feeling overwhelmed by life circumstances roughly once per week. Current data shows people experiencing that same level of overwhelm multiple times daily. The baseline for what constitutes normal mental functioning has shifted dramatically downward. What we now consider typical mental resilience would have been classified as clinical concern just 30 years ago. These patterns aren't random, they're the predictable result of specific environmental changes that have systematically weakened our mental architecture. Constant connectivity means our brains never experience the downtime necessary for processing and recovery. The average person checks their phone dozens of times daily, creating micro-interruptions that prevent deep focus and compound decision fatigue. Social media algorithms specifically target emotional responses to maximize engagement, essentially training our minds to react rather than respond to stimuli. The modern environment has created what researchers call cognitive pollution, where our attention gets hijacked by designed distractions before we can build sustained mental strength. Every notification ping rewires neural pathways to expect immediate stimulation rather than tolerate the discomfort required for growth. The result is minds that can't sit with difficulty long enough to develop genuine resilience. This raises the critical question that keeps neuroscientists awake at night. Are we looking at permanent damage or temporary adaptation? The human brain's plasticity suggests these changes could be reversible, but only if we actively work to reverse them. Without intervention, experts warn the trajectory points toward further deterioration. The encouraging news emerges from recent neuroplasticity research showing that targeted mental training can rebuild compromised cognitive function faster than previously thought possible. Studies demonstrate that specific protocols can restore decision-making capacity and emotional regulation within 8 to 12 weeks of consistent practice. The brain's ability to form new neural pathways remains intact even after years of weakening patterns. While the crisis affects the majority, a small percentage of people are not just surviving but thriving mentally in 2025. These individuals aren't genetically superior, they're using protocols that the general population hasn't discovered yet. They've figured out how to build what scientists call stress immunity through systematic exposure to controlled challenges. Their minds actually get stronger under pressure rather than weaker. The gap between those who know these protocols and those who don't is widening rapidly. People using systematic mental training report significantly better stress management, improved decision-making speed, and enhanced emotional regulation compared to those relying on willpower alone. This isn't about natural talent or lucky circumstances. This is about having access to specific techniques that work. What makes this particularly urgent is how quickly mental strength deteriorates once the decline begins. Unlike physical fitness, where you might maintain strength for weeks without training, mental resilience starts degrading within days of stopping conscious practice. The people who seem effortlessly strong are actually working harder than everyone else to maintain their mental condition. They're just working smarter with proven methods. The compound effect works in both directions. Each day of mental weakness makes the next day's challenges harder to handle. Each day of mental training makes the next day's obstacles easier to navigate. The difference between strengthening and weakening mindsets becomes exponential over time. Someone who starts mental training today will be exponentially stronger 6 months from now than someone who waits to begin. People using systematic mental protocols recover from setbacks significantly faster than those relying on natural resilience alone. This isn't just about feeling better faster, it's about maintaining forward momentum instead of getting stuck in emotional quicksand after every difficulty. Current research indicates that mental strength follows the same principles as physical strength. You can build it systematically through progressive overload, or you can watch it atrophy through neglect. The people who appear naturally strong are simply those who've been training their minds consistently, often without realizing they were following proven protocols. The transformation begins with understanding exactly how your mind currently operates. Most people have never consciously examined their mental software. They're running on default settings installed by their environment rather than programs they've deliberately chosen. Diagnosing your mental operating system. The first step toward building mental strength is understanding exactly how your mind currently processes challenges. Your mind operates on one of two fundamental systems that shape every decision you make and every outcome you experience. Most people have never consciously identified which system controls their thoughts. Yet this single factor determines whether you thrive under pressure or crumble when challenges arise. The reactive operating system runs on autopilot, responding to stimuli before conscious thought can intervene. When someone cuts you off in traffic, a reactive mind immediately floods with anger and frustration. When your boss sends a critical email, the reactive system generates defensive thoughts and emotional responses within milliseconds. This system treats every challenge as an emergency, requiring immediate emotional discharge rather than strategic thinking. The responsive operating system acknowledges the same triggers, but maintains conscious control over the reaction process. A responsive mind notices the anger from being cut off, but chooses how to channel that energy. It receives critical feedback and processes the information for useful elements before deciding how to respond. This system treats challenges as data points requiring analysis rather than threats demanding emotional reactions. Here's how to identify which system currently controls your mental processes. When you receive unexpected criticism, do you immediately feel compelled to defend yourself or attack back? That's reactive programming. Do you scroll through social media when you feel anxious or bored? Reactive response. Do you avoid difficult conversations because they create discomfort? Another reactive pattern. Do you check your phone immediately when you hear a notification sound? Classic reactive behavior that's been programmed into your neural pathways. Responsive behaviors look completely different under identical circumstances. When criticized, a responsive mind asks what truth might exist within the feedback before formulating a reply. When feeling anxious, it investigates the source of the anxiety rather than seeking immediate distraction. During difficult conversations, it stays present with the discomfort because it recognizes valuable information often emerges from challenging discussions. When notifications sound, it finishes the current task before checking messages. Social media platforms have systematically rewired millions of brains for reactive responses through deliberate design choices. Every red notification badge triggers a small dopamine release that reinforces checking behavior. The infinite scroll feature prevents natural stopping points that would allow responsive evaluation of consumed content. Gloria Mark's research shows that our screen attention spans can drop below 1 minute, with constant pings training reactive responses that bypass conscious evaluation. Constant notifications have created what neuroscientists call attention residue, where part of your mental processing power remains dedicated to anticipating the next interruption. This leaves less cognitive capacity available for intentional thought processes that characterize responsive operating systems. Your brain literally cannot operate responsively when it's constantly preparing for the next reactive trigger. Research shows that hundreds of small interruptions daily accumulate into major mental fatigue by overwhelming the prefrontal cortex responsible for executive control. When your brain faces this constant barrage, it starts taking cognitive shortcuts that bypass conscious evaluation. These shortcuts default to reactive patterns because they require less mental energy than responsive analysis. The result is reactive responses becoming your default mode, even in situations where you have time for thoughtful consideration. Neuroplasticity research reveals that repeated behaviors physically reshape brain pathways. Every time you react emotionally to a trigger, you literally build stronger neural highways for reactive responses. Every time you pause before responding, you strengthen pathways associated with conscious control. Your brain physically adapts to whatever you practice most frequently. The process works exactly like muscle development through repetition. If you consistently lift weights, your muscles grow stronger and more defined. If you consistently react emotionally to challenges, your reactive neural pathways become faster and more dominant. If you consistently pause and evaluate before responding, your responsive pathways become your default processing method. Most people never realize they can consciously choose which mental pathways to strengthen. They assume their reactions are fixed personality traits, rather than learned behaviors that can be modified through deliberate practice. Someone who describes themselves as naturally impatient has simply practiced impatient responses more frequently than patient ones. Someone who claims to be naturally calm has unknowingly trained themselves in responsive patterns. Reactive behaviors in 2025 follow predictable patterns that most people don't recognize as learned responses. Immediately opening Instagram when waiting in line trains reactive pathway strength. Sending messages before thinking through potential consequences builds reactive communication patterns. Making purchases based on emotional impulses rather than planned evaluation develops reactive decision-making habits. Responsive behaviors require conscious effort initially, but become automatic through consistent practice. Taking 3 deep breaths before replying to frustrating messages builds responsive communication pathways. Waiting 24 hours before making emotional purchases develops responsive decision-making patterns. Completing one task fully before starting another trains responsive attention control. Here's a simple awareness exercise that begins rewiring your brain immediately. For the next 7 days, notice every time you feel compelled to react quickly to something. Don't try to change the reaction, just notice it happening. Ask yourself whether your response came from reactive programming or conscious choice. This awareness alone starts shifting your brain toward responsive patterns, because consciousness itself interrupts automatic reactive loops. The moment you become aware of your current mental operating system, neural pathways begin shifting towards stronger patterns. Awareness creates space between triggers and responses where conscious choice can occur. This space grows larger with practice until you naturally operate from responsive mode rather than reactive mode. Simply recognizing which system controls your thoughts initiates the transformation process. But awareness alone isn't enough. The real transformation requires deliberately exposing yourself to the very discomfort that modern life has trained you to avoid. Modern fear inoculation protocols. This systematic approach to controlled challenge exposure draws directly from Meichenbaum's stress inoculation training, which demonstrates how deliberate exposure to manageable stressors builds psychological resilience. Modern society has engineered comfort to an unprecedented degree, and the result is catastrophic for mental resilience. We have apps that deliver food without human interaction, streaming services that eliminate the discomfort of choosing entertainment, and social media algorithms that curate reality to match our preferences. This comfort-obsessed environment has produced a generation that experiences genuine distress when faced with minor inconveniences, like slow internet or a delayed response to a text message. This systematic removal of discomfort from daily life has created what researchers call psychological fragility syndrome, where people lack the mental calluses necessary to handle normal life stressors. When everything arrives instantly and smoothly, encountering natural resistance feels overwhelming rather than manageable. The result is minds that break under pressures that previous generations considered routine challenges. Fear inoculation represents the antidote to this modern mental weakness through systematic exposure to controlled discomfort. Just as vaccines introduce weakened pathogens to build immunity against disease, fear inoculation introduces manageable challenges to build immunity against psychological threats. This process doesn't eliminate fear. It transforms fear from a paralyzing force into useful information that guides effective action. The science behind fear inoculation reveals why controlled discomfort creates lasting strength. When you voluntarily face challenges, your brain categorizes the experience differently than when discomfort happens involuntarily. Chosen challenges activate neural pathways associated with personal agency and control, rather than helplessness and victimization. This neurological distinction determines whether difficult experiences build confidence or create trauma. Exposure therapy research from neuroplasticity studies shows that systematic controlled exposure to discomfort literally rewires fear responses in the brain. The protocol involves starting with manageable challenges that create slight anxiety without triggering panic responses. Cold exposure provides one of the most effective foundational practices. Begin with 30-second cold showers rather than jumping into ice baths. This teaches your nervous system that temporary discomfort doesn't indicate actual danger, while building tolerance for physical stress that transfers to psychological challenges. Social feedback exposure represents another crucial area for systematic practice. Instead of avoiding situations where you might face criticism or rejection, deliberately create opportunities for controlled social discomfort. Ask for discounts at full-price stores to build immunity against rejection. Introduce yourself to strangers to practice handling potential embarrassment. Express one unpopular opinion per day rather than seeking constant agreement. Each successful navigation of social discomfort reduces the power of similar situations to create anxiety. The graduated exposure method prevents overwhelming your nervous system while building genuine resilience. Start with microdoses of discomfort that create manageable challenge levels. Make eye contact with strangers for 3 seconds instead of avoiding all social interaction. Exercise until mild fatigue demonstrates that pushing through resistance creates strength rather than damage. Eat alone at restaurants to overcome fear of judgment. The key involves maintaining slight discomfort while avoiding overwhelming challenge levels. Decision-making without consensus represents another crucial area for fear inoculation. Most people seek endless opinions before making choices, creating dependence on external validation for basic life decisions. Practice making small decisions immediately without consulting others. Choose restaurants, movies, or weekend activities based on your preferences alone. Gradually increase the significance of solo decisions until you can make major life choices without requiring unanimous approval. The neuroscience behind voluntary discomfort reveals why this approach creates lasting courage. When you choose to face challenges, your prefrontal cortex remains engaged in the decision-making process. This conscious involvement prevents the amygdala from hijacking your nervous system with panic responses. Repeated voluntary exposure to discomfort literally rewires your brain to associate challenge with growth rather than threat. Basic neuroplasticity principles show that starting small with manageable discomfort and gradually increasing challenge levels creates permanent neural pathway changes. Each time you face fear voluntarily, you strengthen neural pathways associated with courage and weaken pathways associated with avoidance. This isn't positive thinking or mindset work. This is literal brain restructuring through behavioral practice. Common resistance patterns emerge when people begin fear inoculation protocols. Your brain will generate elaborate justifications for avoiding planned discomfort. You'll suddenly remember urgent tasks that require attention instead of facing scheduled challenges. Physical symptoms like headaches or fatigue will appear conveniently before difficult conversations. Recognizing these resistance patterns as evidence of growth rather than legitimate obstacles becomes crucial for protocol success. Progressive overload applies to fear inoculation just as it applies to strength training. Once cold showers become comfortable, progress to longer exposure or colder temperatures. When expressing disagreement feels natural, practice defending positions with supporting evidence. As challenging conversations become routine, initiate discussions about topics you've been avoiding. The compound effect transforms small acts of courage into unshakable confidence through neurological adaptation. Success metrics include decreased recovery time from emotional triggers, increased willingness to initiate difficult conversations, and reduced need for external validation before making decisions. You'll notice that situations which previously created hours of anxiety now generate brief discomfort followed by effective action. The ultimate transformation occurs when fear becomes a signal for growth opportunities rather than retreat commands. But building courage through controlled exposure is only half the equation. Once you can face challenges without falling apart, you need protection systems that prevent external chaos from derailing your progress. Building cognitive armor for 2025. The digital age has transformed judgment into a weapon that anyone can wield against anyone else at any moment. Everyone with an internet connection now believes their opinion about your life choices deserves your immediate attention and emotional response. Social media has weaponized criticism into a 24-hour assault on anyone who dares to live differently than the algorithm-approved standard. Your neighbors comment on your career decisions. Strangers critique your relationship choices. Random accounts dissect your appearance, your goals, your values, and your character based on 30-second glimpses into your existence. This constant barrage of external judgment has created what psychologists call opinion overwhelm syndrome, where people become paralyzed by the sheer volume of conflicting feedback they receive daily. You post a photo and get dozens of different opinions about what you should do differently. You share a career update and receive unsolicited advice from people who've never worked in your industry. You mention a personal struggle and suddenly everyone becomes your unpaid therapist with strong opinions about your healing process. Cognitive armor functions as your mental firewall system that automatically sorts incoming feedback into useful information versus destructive noise. Just as your computer's firewall blocks malicious software while allowing legitimate programs to function, cognitive armor blocks toxic input while preserving access to valuable feedback that actually serves your growth. Without this protection system, your mind becomes vulnerable to every random opinion that crosses your digital or physical path. The 3-filter system provides a systematic method for processing any criticism or feedback you receive. Filter 1 examines source credibility by asking whether the person offering feedback has actual expertise or experience relevant to your situation. Someone who's never built a business shouldn't influence your entrepreneurial decisions. Someone who's never maintained a long-term relationship shouldn't guide your dating choices. Someone who's never faced your specific challenges shouldn't determine your response strategies. Filter 2 searches for useful truth within the feedback, regardless of how it's delivered. Even poorly delivered criticism sometimes contains valuable information that can improve your performance or decision-making. The key involves extracting useful elements while discarding the emotional packaging designed to make you feel bad. Someone might say, "You're terrible at presentations," in a harsh way, but the underlying truth that your presentation skills need improvement could be actionable feedback worth considering. Filter 3 evaluates value alignment by determining whether the feedback supports or contradicts your core principles and long-term objectives. Criticism that pushes you toward compromising your fundamental values should be immediately discarded regardless of who delivers it. Feedback that encourages behavior aligned with your authentic goals deserves serious consideration, even when it comes from unexpected sources. Evidence files serve as your internal database of proof that reinforces your core beliefs against external attacks. When someone questions your capabilities, you reference mental files containing examples of past successes in similar situations. When critics suggest you're making poor choices, you review documented evidence of positive outcomes from previous decisions made using the same decision-making frameworks. These files don't contain delusions or wishful thinking. They contain factual records of your actual performance and results. Building robust evidence files requires systematic documentation of your wins, lessons learned, and progress markers. Most people remember their failures clearly, but forget their successes quickly. This creates vulnerability to external criticism because you lack readily accessible proof of your competence. Strong evidence files contain specific examples of problems you've solved, goals you've achieved, and challenges you've overcome using your current approaches and strategies. Online criticism carries unique challenges because digital anonymity removes normal social constraints that govern face-to-face interactions. People say things online they would never say in person because screen-mediated communication eliminates immediate consequences. Understanding these dynamics helps you recognize that online criticism often reflects the critic's need for social validation rather than genuine concern for your improvement. The cancel culture phenomenon exploits people's fear of social rejection to control behavior through threats of reputation destruction. This creates an environment where conformity gets rewarded while authentic self-expression gets punished. Cognitive armor protects against this manipulation by maintaining internal validation systems that can't be compromised by external approval or disapproval. When your sense of worth comes from internal evidence rather than external opinions, threats of social rejection lose their power to control your choices. Effective cognitive armor allows you to extract valuable feedback while deflecting destructive noise through systematic evaluation rather than emotional reaction. You can appreciate constructive criticism that helps you improve while ignoring toxic comments designed to make you feel inadequate. This selective processing prevents useful information from getting lost in emotional overwhelm while protecting your confidence from unnecessary damage. Defending every attack actually weakens your position because it signals that external opinions have power over your internal state. When you feel compelled to respond to every criticism, you're essentially advertising that your confidence depends on external validation. Strong people respond selectively to feedback that meets their filter criteria while ignoring everything else completely. Unshakable people respond to legitimate criticism with curiosity rather than defensiveness because they're genuinely interested in improving their performance. They ask clarifying questions to understand the critic's perspective better. They request specific examples to identify areas for improvement. They thank people for useful feedback while maintaining boundaries against destructive commentary. True confidence emerges from internal validation systems that can't be compromised by external opinions because they're based on evidence rather than approval. Internal validation systems evaluate your performance against your own standards and objectives rather than other people's expectations. They measure progress based on your improvement over time rather than comparison to others. They generate self-worth from your character and actions rather than external recognition or criticism. Internal validation systems remain stable regardless of external circumstances because they're anchored to objective criteria you control rather than subjective opinions you can't control. When your confidence comes from meeting your own standards consistently, external criticism becomes information to evaluate rather than attacks to defend against. This stability allows you to maintain forward momentum regardless of what others think about your choices or progress. Once you've built this protective system around your mind, you're ready to do pressure transformation alchemy. The most challenging situations become your greatest teachers when you understand pressure transformation alchemy. This process converts stress energy into performance fuel instead of letting it poison your system. The same situation that destroys one person's confidence transforms another person into their most capable version. This isn't about genetics or luck, this is about mastering the neurological mechanics of pressure. Your brain processes pressure through two completely different pathways that create opposite outcomes from identical situations. Threat mode activates when your nervous system interprets pressure as danger, flooding your body with cortisol and adrenaline while shutting down creative thinking and problem-solving capabilities. Challenge mode engages when your brain recognizes pressure as opportunity, releasing performance-enhancing chemicals that sharpen focus and accelerate learning. The difference between these modes determines whether you crumble or excel when stakes get high. Threat mode narrows your vision to immediate survival concerns, making you reactive and defensive. Challenge mode expands your capabilities beyond normal limits, accessing mental resources unavailable during low-pressure situations. Same pressure, completely different neurological response, totally different outcomes. Neurological research demonstrates that reframing techniques can shift people from threat mode to challenge mode within minutes of conscious practice. Study participants who learned specific reframing protocols showed dramatically better performance under high-pressure conditions compared to control groups using willpower alone. Their brain scans revealed increased activity in regions associated with creative problem-solving and decreased activation in areas linked to fear and anxiety. The reframing process starts with recognizing that your body's stress response is actually preparation for peak performance, rather than warning of impending danger. Heart rate acceleration increases blood flow to muscles and brain. Heightened alertness improves reaction time and decision-making speed. Muscle tension provides extra strength for physical demands. These physiological changes become performance advantages when interpreted correctly, instead of symptoms to eliminate. Successful people pre-decide their responses to high-pressure situations through systematic mental rehearsal, rather than hoping they'll perform well when pressure hits. They visualize specific challenges they might face and plan exact responses for each scenario. They practice their physical posture, breathing patterns, and internal dialogue during stressful situations. This preparation transforms unknown variables into familiar patterns their minds can navigate automatically. Professional athletes exemplify this approach by spending hours mentally rehearsing game-winning shots, playoff pressures, and hostile crowd reactions. They don't wait until championship moments to figure out how they'll handle pressure. They've already practiced their response thousands of times mentally. When real pressure arrives, their nervous systems recognize familiar territory rather than encountering unknown threats. Business leaders use identical preparation strategies for high-stakes presentations, difficult negotiations, and crisis management situations. They rehearse potential objections and prepare responses for various scenarios. They practice their physical presence and vocal tone under simulated pressure conditions. They mentally rehearse staying calm when others become emotional or aggressive. This preparation makes pressure situations feel routine rather than exceptional. Preparation fundamentally changes your relationship with stressful events because familiarity eliminates the unknown variables that trigger threat mode responses. When you've mentally rehearsed handling criticism, actual criticism feels manageable rather than devastating. When you've practiced making decisions quickly, time pressure becomes energizing rather than paralyzing. When you've prepared for various outcomes, uncertainty becomes interesting rather than terrifying. The neurological explanation for why some people thrive under pressure while others collapse involves practiced stress interpretation patterns built through repeated exposure. People who consistently interpret pressure as opportunity literally rewire their brains to release performance chemicals instead of fear chemicals when pressure increases. People who consistently interpret pressure as threat create stronger neural pathways that automatically trigger defensive responses. This rewiring happens unconsciously through repeated experience, but you can accelerate the process through conscious practice. Every time you reframe pressure as preparation instead of punishment, you strengthen challenge mode pathways. Every time you focus on opportunities within stressful situations instead of threats, you build neural networks that serve performance rather than protection. The concept of collecting challenges transforms your entire relationship with difficult situations from something to avoid into resources to accumulate. Each challenge you navigate successfully becomes evidence that you can handle pressure and a reference point for future stressful situations. Your mind builds a database of proof that pressure enhances rather than diminishes your capabilities. Challenge collection works like building a resume of pressure victories that your nervous system can reference during future stressful events. When you face new pressure, your brain searches for similar past experiences to predict outcomes. If your database contains examples of pressure leading to growth and success, your nervous system prepares for peak performance. If your database contains examples of pressure leading to failure and overwhelm, your nervous system prepares for defensive survival. Intentional challenge collection involves systematically seeking situations that create manageable pressure so you can practice transforming stress into performance fuel. You volunteer for presentations that make you nervous. You initiate difficult conversations you've been avoiding. You take on projects that push your current skill boundaries. Each successful navigation adds another reference point, proving pressure enhances your capabilities. The transformation happens when pressure shifts from feeling like punishment to feeling like rocket fuel for achieving goals beyond your normal capacity. Your heart rate increases and you think, "Perfect, my body is preparing for peak performance," instead of "something is wrong, I need to escape this situation." Your muscles tense and you recognize preparation for extra strength rather than symptoms of anxiety. Pressure alchemy converts every stressful situation into fuel for exceeding your previous performance limits rather than obstacles threatening your current comfort level. Your nervous system learns to associate pressure with accessing enhanced capabilities instead of protecting against potential threats. This transformation makes you genuinely grateful for high-pressure situations because they provide opportunities to operate at levels impossible during routine circumstances. But here's where most people sabotage their newfound strength. They try to apply it to everything at once, spreading their mental energy so thin that nothing gets the focus it deserves. Strategic emotional investment. The solution lies in understanding that your emotional energy operates exactly like a financial budget, with limited funds available for investment. Successful people understand what everyone else misses. Caring about everything equally guarantees you'll accomplish nothing meaningful. Spend your emotional resources on random drama and you'll have nothing left for the goals that actually matter. Most people scatter their emotional investment across dozens of meaningless concerns, then wonder why they feel exhausted without achieving anything significant. Strategic emotional investment means developing laser focus on what deserves your mental energy while becoming systematically indifferent to everything else. This isn't about being heartless or disconnected from reality. This is about recognizing that your attention and emotional capacity are finite resources that must be allocated strategically to create the outcomes you actually want in life. The emotional energy allocation matrix provides a framework for sorting every concern into high-impact or low-impact categories. High-impact concerns directly influence your health, relationships, career progression, or personal growth. Low-impact concerns might feel urgent, but create zero meaningful change in your life circumstances. Social media arguments fall into low-impact territory. Your fitness and skill development belong in high-impact categories. Political outrage represents the perfect example of low-impact emotional investment that feels important but produces no measurable improvement in your actual life. You can spend hours daily feeling angry about political decisions you cannot influence, while neglecting the business skills, relationship habits, or health practices you control completely. The person posting angry political comments achieves nothing beyond emotional exhaustion, while the person investing that same energy in skill development advances their career prospects measurably. Current outrage culture specifically tricks people into wasting emotional energy on battles they cannot win, while ignoring opportunities they could dominate. Social media algorithms amplify content that generates strong emotional reactions because engagement equals profit for platforms. Your anger and indignation become commodities that tech companies monetize, while you receive nothing except stress and distraction from your real objectives. The importance versus control framework eliminates wasted emotional investment by asking two critical questions about every concern that demands your attention. First, how important is this issue to your long-term goals and well-being? Second, how much control do you actually have over the outcome? Issues that score high on importance and high on control deserve maximum emotional investment. Issues that score low on either category deserve minimal or zero emotional energy, regardless of how urgent they seem. Celebrity scandals score 0 on both importance and control, yet consume millions of hours of collective emotional energy daily. Your neighbor's life choices might seem important, but you control none of their decisions, so emotional investment produces only frustration. Your own skill development scores high on importance, and you control it completely, so maximum emotional investment creates maximum returns. Successful people ignore entire categories of concerns that dominate other people's mental space. They don't follow celebrity drama or engage in social media arguments about topics they cannot influence. They don't worry about other people's opinions of their choices or try to control outcomes beyond their direct influence. They don't invest emotional energy in correcting strangers on the internet or defending their lifestyle choices to critics. This selective indifference creates enormous reserves of emotional energy for high-impact activities that unsuccessful people claim they're too tired or overwhelmed to pursue. While others exhaust themselves arguing about politics, successful people study industry trends that could advance their careers. While others stress about celebrity relationships, successful people work on their own relationship skills and communication patterns. Strategic indifference to low-impact situations creates what feels like unlimited energy for pursuing goals that actually matter because you're no longer bleeding emotional resources through meaningless channels. Someone who stops following political drama suddenly has extra mental bandwidth for learning new skills. Someone who stops engaging in social media arguments discovers they have energy for difficult but valuable conversations with people in their actual life. Many people resist strategic emotional investment because they fear appearing callous or disconnected from important social issues. This fear stems from misunderstanding the difference between caring about outcomes and caring about processes you cannot control. You can care deeply about social justice while refusing to engage in online arguments that change no minds and help no causes. You can support important causes through strategic action while avoiding emotional exhaustion through endless outrage consumption. Selective caring actually enables deeper and more meaningful engagement with the issues and people that truly matter to you. When you stop spreading your emotional energy across hundreds of meaningless concerns, you can invest deeply in the relationships and goals that deserve your full attention. Your family relationships improve when you're not constantly distracted by social media drama. Your career advancement accelerates when you focus on skill development instead of workplace gossip. This concentrated emotional investment creates compound returns because deep engagement produces better outcomes than scattered attention. Someone who cares deeply about 5 important areas of life achieves more meaningful progress than someone who cares moderately about 50 different concerns. Depth beats breadth when it comes to emotional investment and life satisfaction. Emotional precision separates people who accomplish significant goals from those who stay busy without creating meaningful progress. Precise emotional investment means your feelings serve your objectives rather than random external triggers controlling your internal state. You feel anger when it motivates useful action and maintain calm when anger would hinder progress. You feel excitement about opportunities within your control and remain neutral about circumstances beyond your influence. This precision transforms scattered emotional reactivity into focused power that moves you toward your chosen destinations, rather than wherever external circumstances push you. But even with perfect emotional focus, there's still one massive energy drain that sabotages most people's mental performance before they even realize what's happening. Decision fatigue, immunity system. That drain comes from the approximately 35,000 decisions your brain processes every single day, most of which are completely pointless. You decide what to wear from a closet full of clothes you've worn before. You choose what to eat from restaurants you've visited dozens of times. You pick which route to take to locations you've driven to hundreds of times. Each micro-decision drains precious mental energy that could power the choices that actually determine your success and happiness. Decision fatigue operates like a hidden virus that systematically weakens your cognitive performance throughout each day without you realizing what's happening. Every choice you make depletes the same mental resource pool that handles complex problem-solving, creative thinking, and strategic planning. By noon, your brain has already processed thousands of trivial decisions, leaving significantly less capacity for the important choices that require your full mental power. This explains why successful people often seem to make better decisions than everyone else. They're not naturally smarter. They've systematically eliminated unnecessary decisions from their daily routine. Steve Jobs wore identical outfits to preserve mental energy for innovation decisions. Barack Obama streamlined his wardrobe choices to focus cognitive resources on presidential responsibilities. Mark Zuckerberg automates clothing decisions to maintain mental bandwidth for business strategy. These aren't quirky habits, they're strategic systems designed to protect mental performance. The decision hierarchy provides a framework for separating choices that deserve your full attention from those that should run on autopilot. Level 1 decisions affect your health, relationships, career trajectory, or financial future. These deserve careful consideration and your best mental energy. Level 2 decisions involve routine activities with minimal long-term consequences. These should be automated through pre-established systems and rules. Clothing decisions represent the perfect example of wasted mental energy that could be redirected toward meaningful choices. Instead of standing in front of your closet every morning evaluating options, create a uniform system that eliminates daily clothing decisions. Choose 5 outfits that make you feel confident and rotate through them systematically. This simple automation saves 15 to 20 minutes of daily decision-making energy that accumulates into hours of preserved mental capacity each week. Food choices drain enormous amounts of mental energy when approached randomly instead of systematically. Successful people eliminate meal decision fatigue through strategic planning and automation. They eat identical breakfasts each morning, removing the need to evaluate options when willpower is strongest. They pre-plan weekly meals during low-stress periods rather than making food choices when hungry and tired. They identify 3 default lunch options that provide good nutrition without requiring daily evaluation. Decision rules eliminate the mental processing required for recurring situations by establishing predetermined responses to common scenarios. Create rules for responding to social invitations based on your priorities and energy levels. Establish criteria for saying yes or no to work opportunities without evaluating each request individually. Develop automatic responses to common email types that don't require personalized consideration. These rules function like mental shortcuts that preserve cognitive energy for unique situations requiring creative thinking. Default options prove especially powerful for choices that occur frequently but have minimal impact on your life outcomes. Set default tip percentages for different service categories instead of calculating amounts each time. Choose default gift options for various relationships and occasions, rather than starting from scratch every time someone has a birthday. Establish default responses to common questions about your schedule, availability, or preferences. Good enough defaults prevent perfectionism from consuming mental energy, better invested elsewhere. The perfectionism trap destroys mental performance by applying maximum cognitive effort to minimum impact decisions. People spend 30 minutes researching the perfect restaurant for lunch, then make impulsive career decisions without proper analysis. They agonize over minor purchase decisions while neglecting major financial planning. They perfect email formatting while avoiding difficult conversations that could advance their relationships or careers. This backward allocation of mental energy guarantees poor outcomes in areas that actually matter. Pre-deciding responses to common situations eliminates daily mental stress by removing uncertainty from routine interactions. Decide in advance how you'll respond to criticism from colleagues. Plan your reaction to traffic delays before they happen. Choose your approach to social media interactions before logging in. Establish your boundaries for work requests outside normal hours. These predetermined responses eliminate the cognitive load of processing familiar situations repeatedly. Morning routines exemplify the power of pre-decided responses to recurring situations. Instead of making dozens of small choices about timing, activities, and priorities, successful people follow predetermined sequences that optimize their energy and focus. They wake up at consistent times without debating whether to sleep longer. They follow established exercise routines without questioning whether to work out. They eat planned breakfasts without evaluating options. This automation preserves mental energy for unique challenges that arise throughout the day. The transformation occurs when your mental energy gets reserved for decisions that actually determine your life trajectory, rather than being scattered across meaningless daily choices. Your problem-solving abilities sharpen because cognitive resources aren't depleted by trivial decisions. Your creativity increases because mental bandwidth is available for innovative thinking. Your strategic planning improves because you have sufficient cognitive capacity remaining for complex analysis. This systematic approach to decision management creates compound benefits because preserved mental energy accumulates over time. Someone who saves 20 minutes of daily decision-making energy gains over 120 hours annually of additional cognitive capacity. This represents 3 full weeks of mental power that can be redirected toward goals that create meaningful progress, rather than maintaining status quo through endless trivial choices. But protecting your mental energy from decision drain is only part of building unshakable strength. The other crucial component involves systematically toughening your emotional responses to handle whatever challenges come your way. Emotional callus development. Physical calluses form when your hands repeatedly grip rough surfaces, creating thick protective layers that prevent future blisters and cuts. Your emotional system works identically when you repeatedly expose yourself to emotional discomfort. Your mind develops psychological calluses that protect against criticism, rejection, and judgment. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding emotional friction, then wonder why the smallest criticism sends them into emotional chaos for days. Controlled vulnerability represents the systematic method for building psychological scar tissue that shields you from emotional damage. This isn't about becoming numb or disconnected from feelings. This is about developing thick enough emotional skin that external reactions cannot penetrate your core confidence and derail your forward progress. Just as physical calluses allow you to grip rough surfaces without pain, emotional calluses allow you to navigate harsh feedback without internal destruction. Systematic exposure to judgment and criticism builds immunity to both through the same biological process that creates physical resilience. Your nervous system adapts to repeated stressors by developing stronger response patterns and higher tolerance thresholds. Someone who never receives criticism crumbles when faced with negative feedback. Someone who regularly exposes themselves to judgment develops natural immunity that makes future criticism feel manageable rather than devastating. The vulnerability stacking protocol gradually increases your emotional resilience through progressive exposure to uncomfortable situations. Start with microdoses of social discomfort that create slight anxiety without overwhelming your system. Share an unpopular opinion in a low-stakes conversation. Post content online that might receive mixed reactions. Wear clothing that expresses your personality rather than fitting in with group norms. These small exposures build tolerance for larger social risks. Progressive exposure increases the vulnerability dose by seeking feedback on your work or ideas from people whose opinions you respect, but whose criticism might sting. Ask your supervisor for honest feedback about your performance, including areas needing improvement. Request brutal honesty from friends about habits that might be holding you back. Submit creative work to forums where constructive criticism is expected. Each experience builds emotional calluses that make future feedback less threatening. Advanced practice introduces deliberate social awkwardness through behaviors that violate minor social conventions without causing harm. Ask for discounts at stores that don't typically negotiate prices. Initiate conversations with strangers in appropriate social settings. Express genuine compliments to people you don't know well. Dance badly in public without alcohol as social lubricant. These exercises build immunity to social judgment and awkwardness. Professional vulnerability expands the practice by taking visible risks that might result in public failure or criticism. Volunteer for presentations to audiences that might ask challenging questions. Propose new ideas at work that might get rejected. Apply for positions slightly beyond your current qualification level. Launch projects that might fail publicly. Each calculated risk builds calluses against professional judgment and career setbacks. Specific exercises for building calluses against common emotional triggers must target your personal areas of sensitivity. If you fear looking stupid, deliberately ask questions in group settings that might reveal knowledge gaps. If you fear rejection, initiate social interactions where acceptance isn't guaranteed. If you fear judgment about your appearance, wear clothes that express your authentic style rather than safe conformity. If you fear professional criticism, share work before it feels perfectly polished. Each successful navigation of emotional discomfort creates evidence that you can handle more challenging situations without permanent damage. Your brain builds a database of proof that criticism doesn't destroy you, rejection doesn't define you, and judgment doesn't control you. This evidence accumulates into unshakable confidence because you've literally experienced surviving and thriving through the situations that terrify most people. The compound effect works powerfully in emotional callus development because each layer of protective tissue makes the next exposure less impactful. Your first public speaking experience might generate intense anxiety and days of recovery time. Your 20th public presentation feels routine because you've developed thick calluses against audience judgment. Your first business rejection might trigger weeks of self-doubt. Your 50th rejection becomes valuable market research rather than personal attack. Avoiding emotional discomfort keeps you permanently fragile because your nervous system never develops appropriate response patterns for handling inevitable criticism and judgment. Life will expose you to difficult feedback, whether you prepare for it or not. People who avoid controlled vulnerability remain vulnerable to uncontrolled emotional attacks throughout their lives. Someone who's never built calluses against criticism suffers disproportionate damage when criticism eventually arrives. Social media provides unlimited opportunities for emotional callus building through posting content that expresses authentic opinions rather than safe consensus views. Share perspectives that might generate disagreement or debate. Post photos that show your real life rather than curated perfection. Express support for causes you believe in, even when they're unpopular. Engage in respectful disagreement with people whose views differ from yours. Each interaction builds immunity to online judgment and criticism. Emotional calluses enable you to pursue bigger risks and opportunities because fear of judgment no longer controls your decision-making process. You can start businesses without worrying about critics questioning your qualifications. You can express authentic opinions without fear of social backlash. You can pursue relationships without terror of rejection. You can change careers without anxiety about others' approval. Your choices become driven by your values rather than other people's potential reactions. The ultimate transformation creates genuine emotional independence where your happiness, confidence, and self-worth operate independently from external validation or criticism. You become literally immune to the emotional manipulation that controls most people's behavior, because thick psychological calluses prevent external opinions from penetrating your core identity. Your emotional state becomes self-regulated rather than externally controlled. But even with bulletproof emotional armor, there's still one final skill that separates the truly unshakable from everyone else: the ability to transform any situation. Reality reframing mastery. This mastery begins with understanding that every situation contains multiple possible interpretations, and you get to choose which interpretation controls your emotional response and determines your next actions. Two people can experience identical circumstances and walk away with completely different feelings, energy levels, and motivation simply because they selected different frames for understanding what happened. This isn't positive thinking or wishful delusion. This is strategic perspective selection that transforms your relationship to unchangeable facts. Reality reframing represents the master skill of maintaining power over your internal experience, regardless of external circumstances. When life delivers situations you cannot control, you always retain complete authority over how you interpret those situations. Someone else gets the promotion you wanted, and you can frame this as evidence of your inadequacy or as valuable feedback about areas requiring development. Your relationship ends, and you can interpret this as proof of your unworthiness or as liberation from incompatibility that was limiting both people's growth potential. The critical distinction separates empowering perspective selection from delusional thinking through honest acknowledgement of factual reality. Delusional thinking denies or distorts actual facts to maintain comfortable illusions. Empowering reframing accepts facts completely while choosing interpretations that serve your growth and progress, rather than reinforcing victimhood or helplessness. Getting fired from your job is factual reality. Whether this fact means you're a failure or means you're now free to find better opportunities represents your interpretive choice. The three-step reframing protocol provides systematic method for transforming any situation from disempowering to developmental. Step 1 involves stating the bare facts without emotional interpretation or meaning assignment. You lost your job, your partner ended the relationship, your business failed, your health diagnosis came back positive. These represent objective facts that require acknowledgement without emotional overlay or meaning attribution. Step 2 examines the most disempowering interpretation possible for these facts. This step isn't about dwelling in negativity, but about consciously recognizing the victim narrative your mind might default to without conscious intervention. The job loss means you're incompetent and unemployable. The relationship ending proves you're unlovable and destined for loneliness. The business failure demonstrates your lack of capability and intelligence. These interpretations lead to depression, anxiety, and paralysis. Step 3 identifies the most empowering truth available within the same factual situation. The job loss means you're now free to find work that better matches your skills and values. The relationship ending means you're both free to find more compatible partners. The business failure means you've gained expensive education about what doesn't work. These interpretations lead to energy, motivation, and productive action. Identical situations produce completely different life outcomes depending on which interpretive frame you select. Someone who frames job loss as personal failure might spend months in depression and self-doubt. Someone who frames identical job loss as opportunity for career advancement might immediately begin networking and skill development. Same facts, different frames, entirely different trajectories. The situation doesn't determine your response. Your interpretation of the situation determines your response. Common challenges provide perfect examples of how reframing transforms experience. Job loss in today's economy can feel devastating when framed as evidence of your expendability in an unstable market. The same job loss becomes energizing when framed as forced opportunity to escape a role that wasn't utilizing your full potential. Remote work elimination can feel like rejection when framed as companies not trusting employees. The same policy change becomes liberation when framed as motivation to develop location-independent income streams. Health challenges reveal how interpretation determines experience even in difficult circumstances. Receiving a chronic illness diagnosis can feel like life sentence when framed as limitation and decline. The same diagnosis becomes motivation for optimizing lifestyle and health practices when framed as early warning system. Someone who frames health challenges as victimization tends to become passive and helpless. Someone who frames health challenges as information tends to become proactive and empowered. The fundamental difference between victims and victors lies in their automatic interpretive patterns for processing identical experiences. Victims default to interpretations that reinforce powerlessness and external blame. Victors default to interpretations that emphasize personal agency and growth opportunities. These patterns become self-reinforcing because your interpretations determine your actions, and your actions determine your outcomes. Finding growth opportunities within every setback requires systematic examination of how difficulties might serve your long-term development. Lost opportunities force you to develop resilience and persistence. Criticism reveals blind spots you can address. Failures provide data about what doesn't work. Setbacks slow you down enough to evaluate whether you're moving in the right direction. Health challenges motivate lifestyle improvements you might otherwise avoid. Relationship problems highlight personal patterns that need attention. Anxiety reframing demonstrates how changing interpretation transforms emotional experience from paralyzing to productive. Anxiety traditionally gets interpreted as stop sign indicating danger and need for avoidance. Reframing anxiety as preparation checklist transforms the same physiological sensations into useful information about areas requiring attention or preparation. Anxious feelings about public speaking become reminders to practice presentation skills and prepare talking points. Same physical sensations, different interpretations, completely different outcomes. Reality reframing creates mental strength because external circumstances lose their power to destabilize your core interpretation of events. When you master reframing, critics cannot make you feel worthless because you interpret criticism as free market research. Failures cannot make you feel hopeless because you interpret failures as expensive education. But there's something even more powerful than simply reframing what happens to you. Anti-fragile mind construction. That power lies in building an anti-fragile mind that doesn't just survive challenges, but literally gets stronger because of them. Resilience gets all the attention, but it's actually the weaker cousin of true mental strength. Resilient people bounce back from attacks and setbacks, which sounds impressive until you realize they're still getting damaged by those attacks in the first place. Anti-fragile minds operate on a completely different level. Every criticism makes them more confident. Every failure makes them more capable. Every attack makes them more powerful than before. Anti-fragility represents the ultimate mental strength, where stressors become strengtheners rather than threats to overcome. Instead of trying to protect yourself from difficult situations, you actively seek them out because you understand they're upgrading your mental operating system. This isn't about being masochistic or enjoying pain for its own sake. This is about recognizing that controlled stress creates the only pathway to genuine strength development in any biological system. Your muscles demonstrate anti-fragile principles every time you exercise. The microscopic tears created by resistance training don't weaken your muscles. They trigger repair processes that build bigger, stronger muscle fibers. Without the stress of progressive overload, your muscles atrophy and weaken. With appropriate stress applied systematically, they grow beyond their previous limitations. Your mind operates according to identical principles, but most people never apply stress systematically enough to trigger mental growth. Your immune system provides another perfect example of anti-fragile development through controlled exposure to pathogens. Vaccines work by introducing weakened versions of diseases that allow your immune system to build antibodies without experiencing full-scale infection. Each exposure creates stronger immunity against future attacks. People who live in sterile environments actually develop weaker immune systems because their bodies never learn to fight off threats effectively. Mental anti-fragility works through the same biological mechanisms that strengthen muscles and immune systems. Each time you voluntarily expose yourself to criticism, your mind builds stronger response patterns for handling future judgment. Each time you navigate failure successfully, your brain develops better problem-solving pathways for overcoming obstacles. Each time you face fear directly, your nervous system creates more effective courage responses for future challenges. The mindset shift that creates anti-fragile thinking transforms every criticism into valuable market research about your performance and presentation. Instead of feeling attacked when someone points out your weaknesses, you feel grateful for free consulting that helps you improve. Instead of getting defensive when someone questions your methods, you get curious about whether their perspective contains useful information. Instead of avoiding critics, you seek them out because they provide the most honest feedback about areas needing development. This reframing process turns failures into expensive education you didn't have to pay for directly. Every business failure teaches lessons about market dynamics, customer behavior, and operational efficiency that successful companies spend millions learning through consulting and research. Every relationship failure provides insights about communication patterns, compatibility factors, and personal growth areas that therapists charge hundreds of dollars to help people discover. Every career setback reveals information about industry trends, skill gaps, and strategic positioning that career coaches spend years helping clients understand. Anti-fragile people actively seek out feedback that stings because they understand painful criticism often contains the most valuable insights for improvement. They request honest evaluations from people whose opinions might hurt, but whose expertise could help. They ask specifically for negative feedback rather than seeking validation and compliments. They pursue mentors known for being demanding and critical rather than supportive and encouraging. They understand that comfort zones contain no growth opportunities. The protocol for turning attacks into advantages starts with systematic reframing of negative experiences as growth opportunities. When someone criticizes your work, immediately ask yourself, what truth exists within their feedback that could improve your performance? When someone questions your capabilities, use their doubt as motivation to develop stronger skills that make their criticism irrelevant. When someone tries to undermine your confidence, extract any useful information from their attack while discarding the emotional manipulation. Document every piece of criticism you receive and analyze it for actionable insights that could accelerate your development. Keep a criticism journal where you record feedback, identify useful elements, and track improvements made based on negative input. This systematic approach transforms random attacks into structured learning opportunities that compound over time. Most people waste the educational value of criticism by focusing on the emotional impact rather than the informational content. The transformation occurs when you genuinely become grateful for challenges and opposition because you recognize they're providing free strength training for your mind. Difficult people become unwitting coaches who help you practice patience and communication skills. Unexpected problems become opportunities to develop creative problem-solving abilities you wouldn't have accessed otherwise. Professional setbacks become catalysts for skill development and strategic thinking that advance your career faster than smooth sailing ever could. Anti-fragile thinking makes you literally stronger than anything that tries to break you, because each attack becomes fuel for your growth rather than damage to your system. Critics become inadvertent coaches who help you improve your performance. Competitors become sparring partners who push you to develop better strategies. Obstacles become training equipment that builds your problem-solving muscles. Failures become education that increases your success probability in future attempts. The compound effect of anti-fragile thinking creates exponential strength development over time. Each challenge you transform into growth makes you more capable of handling bigger challenges. Each criticism you convert into improvement makes you more confident in your abilities. Each failure you reframe as education makes you more strategic in your planning. This upward spiral continues indefinitely because there's no upper limit to how strong an anti-fragile mind can become. This transformation creates unshakable confidence because your strength comes from your ability to grow rather than your ability to avoid challenges. Nothing can permanently damage you because everything can strengthen you when processed correctly. Your power comes from your capacity to transform any input into growth rather than your ability to control external circumstances. When you reach this level of mental development, something interesting happens. People begin to notice your strength without you having to announce it. Authentic strength projection. This natural recognition reveals itself through the way authentically strong people carry themselves in the world. The most intimidating people you've ever encountered weren't the ones making the most noise or putting on aggressive displays. They were the ones who remained perfectly calm while everyone around them panicked. Real intimidation comes from competence, not theatrics. It emerges from the quiet confidence of someone who knows they can handle whatever situation arises without needing to advertise that capability to others. Genuine mental strength projects naturally through your presence without requiring conscious effort or performance. You don't have to tell people you're mentally strong when you actually are. Your energy communicates your capabilities before you speak a single word. People sense authentic strength the same way they detect authentic weakness, through subtle behavioral cues that operate below conscious awareness, but trigger immediate recognition. Authentically strong people exhibit distinct body language patterns that communicate competence without aggression. They maintain relaxed posture even during stressful conversations because tension doesn't serve their objectives. Their facial expressions remain neutral rather than defensive when receiving criticism because they're processing information rather than protecting ego. They make steady eye contact without staring aggressively because they're genuinely interested in understanding rather than dominating interactions. Their speech patterns reflect inner calm through measured pacing and deliberate word choice. They don't rush to fill silence because quiet moments don't create anxiety for them. They ask questions more than they make statements because they're genuinely curious about other perspectives rather than trying to prove their intelligence. They speak with consistent volume and tone regardless of emotional pressure because their internal state remains stable during external chaos. Movement patterns of mentally strong people communicate confidence through economy of motion and purposeful gestures. They don't fidget or engage in nervous behaviors because internal anxiety doesn't drive their physical responses. They walk with consistent pace and posture, regardless of social pressure, because their self-worth doesn't depend on others' approval. They use hand gestures to emphasize points rather than fill nervous energy because their communication serves specific purposes. Calmness under pressure communicates strength more powerfully than any aggressive display or emotional outburst. When everyone else starts panicking during crisis situations, the person who maintains composure automatically becomes the leader others look to for guidance. Their calm energy provides stability that others desperately need during chaotic moments. This natural leadership emergence happens without them seeking control or demanding authority. The neurological explanation involves mirror neurons that cause people to unconsciously mimic the emotional states of those around them. When you project calm energy during stressful situations, others' nervous systems automatically begin matching your state rather than remaining in panic mode. Your regulated emotional state becomes contagious in positive ways that create group stability and improve decision-making capacity. The paradox that destroys most people's attempts at projecting strength involves the inverse relationship between needing to prove strength and actually possessing it. People who constantly talk about how tough they are usually aren't. People who frequently mention their achievements typically lack genuine confidence in their abilities. People who aggressively defend their positions often doubt the validity of those positions themselves. Authentic strength requires no external validation because it operates from internal evidence rather than others' opinions. Someone who knows they can handle difficult situations doesn't need others to acknowledge that capability. Someone who has systematically built mental resilience doesn't require recognition of their efforts. Someone who possesses genuine confidence doesn't need compliments or approval to maintain their self-worth. The compound effect of implementing systematic mental training creates an unmistakable presence that others recognize immediately. Fear inoculation training produces calm responses to situations that panic most people. cognitive armor development creates immunity to criticism that devastates others. Pressure transformation skills generate performance enhancement when others experience stress-induced deterioration. These capabilities combine into overall presence that communicates strength without words. Emotional callus development eliminates the defensive reactions that signal weakness to observers. Someone who has built immunity to criticism doesn't flinch when receiving negative feedback because it genuinely doesn't threaten their self-concept. Someone who has practiced rejection exposure doesn't become defensive when others disagree with their choices because disagreement feels routine rather than threatening. People naturally defer to those who don't need external validation because that independence signals genuine capability rather than performance-based competence. Someone who operates from internal validation systems makes decisions based on evidence and values rather than social approval. This consistency creates trust because others know the person's choices aren't subject to social pressure or emotional manipulation. Authentic strength allows for gentleness because there's nothing to prove through aggressive behavior or emotional dominance. Someone who knows they can handle confrontation doesn't need to create confrontation to demonstrate capability. Someone who has built genuine confidence can afford to be kind because kindness doesn't threaten their position or self-worth. The transformation in how others treat you becomes obvious as your mental strength develops authentically. People start asking for your opinion during group decisions because they recognize your judgment quality. Colleagues begin deferring to your preferences because they trust your decision-making processes. Friends seek your advice during personal crises because they sense your emotional stability. Professional opportunities increase because authentic confidence attracts collaboration while insecurity repels it. Business partnerships develop more easily because people want to work with individuals who remain calm under pressure. Leadership roles emerge naturally because groups gravitate toward members who project competence without neediness or desperation. The beautiful irony reveals itself through the recognition that the strongest minds inspire respect through their unshakable calm rather than their force. True power whispers while weakness shouts. Authentic strength attracts while manufactured toughness repels. The people who command genuine respect do so through demonstrated competence rather than demanded acknowledgement. But here's what makes this transformation urgent in ways previous generations never experienced. The world around you isn't getting easier or more forgiving. The mental demands are escalating rapidly, and the gap between those who've built systematic strength and those who haven't is widening into a chasm that becomes harder to cross with each passing day. Every protocol in this system works, but only if you implement them systematically rather than hoping mental strength develops accidentally. Mental strength in 2025 isn't optional anymore. It's the difference between thriving and barely surviving in an increasingly chaotic world. While everyone else gets weaker from comfort and convenience, you now have the protocols to build anti-fragile mental armor that gets stronger under pressure. The choice is yours right now. You can continue operating on default mental software that leaves you vulnerable to every criticism and challenge. Or you can systematically build the cognitive armor, emotional calluses, and pressure transformation skills that separate the mentally strong from the mentally fragile. Here's the final truth. The only thing scarier than having a weak mind is knowing